Imagine this. You're sitting alone in a crowded room. Conversations buzz around you, harmless gossip, recycled opinions, performative laughter. People speak, but no one says anything real. You feel it, don't you? That eerie hollowness hiding behind their perfectly rehearsed personas. You nod along, smile at the right times, but inside your thoughts are elsewhere. You wonder, why does no one question this? Why does everyone seem so comfortable being replicas of each other? You try to speak up. You point out the contradictions, the masks people wear, the quiet despair no one dares to name. But as soon as you open your mouth, the energy shifts, the air tightens, eyes glaze over. People laugh awkwardly, change the subject, or worse, turn on you. Not with pitchforks or accusations, but with subtle cues, a cold shoulder, a passive-aggressive comment, an unspoken message, "You're not one of us." And just like that, you realize something chilling. Society doesn't fear violence. It fears insight. It fears those who see through the veil, because those who see clearly cannot be controlled. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." But what he didn't say is what happens after that shot is fired. Society doesn't applaud. It flinches. The very people who lift civilization with their minds are often the ones shoved to its edges. Thinkers, philosophers, visionaries. They're mocked, ridiculed, or labeled too intense, too sensitive, too complicated. Their intelligence becomes a threat, not because it harms, but because it illuminates. Because if someone sees what you've trained yourself not to see, they're not just exposing the world, they're exposing you. Why does this happen? Why does raw intelligence, especially when paired with deep introspection, provoke such discomfort? Why do people instinctively retreat from those who question, observe, and dissect the world around them? Not because they're wrong, but because they're right too right. Because intelligence, in its purest form, isn't about data or diplomas. It's about awareness. It sees the lies we've told ourselves to sleep at night. It questions the things we've accepted because everyone else has. And most terrifying of all, it makes you remember you were once capable of seeing too. Imagine walking into a dark cave where everyone has lived their entire lives. You hold a torch, you offer light, but instead of gratitude, you're met with anger. People shield their eyes. They scream, not because you've hurt them, but because you've made them see. This isn't hypothetical. This is every day of your life if you think too deeply. This is what happens when you wake up while everyone else is still dreaming and calling it reality. They don't say thank you for waking them. They call you arrogant. They call you negative. They call you dangerous. But tell me, what's more dangerous? The man who questions the dream, or the crowd who defends it with blind certainty? There's a paradox here. Society thrives on intelligence. It builds schools, awards prizes, idolizes innovators, until that intelligence becomes introspective, until it stops feeding the machine and starts dismantling it. Then it becomes unacceptable, even threatening, because intelligence that obeys is genius, but intelligence that questions is rebellion. And rebellion, especially quiet internal rebellion, is the one thing mass culture cannot tolerate. Schopenhauer understood this well. He spent most of his life ridiculed by the academic elite, rejected by his peers, and dismissed as pessimistic. But he saw what others didn't. He saw the unconscious motives that drive human behavior, the games we play to avoid pain, the illusions we adopt to stay sane. He once wrote, "The greatest achievements of the human mind are generally received with distrust, and maybe that's because they don't just challenge the world outside, they challenge the fortress we've built inside ourselves." So the question isn't, why are intelligent people feared? The question is, what does their presence reveal about the rest of us? Maybe it's not the intelligence we fear. Maybe it's the mirror it holds up. The mirror that reflects our compromises, our half-lived lives, our quiet surrender to the path of least resistance. And maybe, just maybe, we lash out not because we despise the intelligent, but because we despise what they remind us we once were and chose not to be. What if the fear of intelligence isn't just a social reaction? What if it's a deep psychological defense? What if we're hardwired to reject what threatens our illusion of stability, even if it's the truth? What if the outcast, the loner, the philosopher wasn't sick, but the only sane one in the room? Let's go deeper. Let's uncover the hidden machinery behind this phenomenon, the quiet forces inside the human psyche and society that make intelligence a threat. Because once you understand that, you'll never look at rejection, silence, or loneliness the same way again. To understand why society instinctively turns away from deeply intelligent people, You have to start in the most uncomfortable place imaginable, inside the mind of the average person. Not the one they show to the world, but the one they lock away even from themselves. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean. Beneath the surface lies a world no one dares explore. It's not because it's evil, it's because it's unbearably honest. Intelligence, true intelligence, dives straight into that ocean. It doesn't float, it doesn't paddle on the surface. It goes down, deep, where the pressure warps your sense of time, self, and truth. Most people never leave the shoreline, and those who do, they scare everyone who stays behind. At the root of this rejection is a psychological defense mechanism called cognitive dissonance. When an intelligent person speaks, they don't just share ideas, they confront illusions. And illusions are what most people build their lives on: social roles, cultural norms, inherited beliefs. If you challenge these, you're not just disagreeing, you're threatening the mental scaffolding that holds their identity together. Think of Carl Jung's concept of the persona. It's the mask you wear to fit in. Jung believed we all need personas to survive socially, but when a person becomes too attached to the mask, they forget it's not real. The highly intelligent often reject the persona, or worse, they see through other people's. That kind of clarity is radioactive. It burns through surface-level interactions, forcing people to confront who they've become, and when they're not ready for that, they retaliate. Not with logic, but with rejection. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right too soon. Arthur Schopenhauer called this human contradiction willful blindness. He believed people are not driven by reason, but by will, a blind, insatiable force of desire that shapes our thoughts and behaviors from beneath our awareness. Intelligence that doesn't serve the will is dismissed. If your insights don't confirm someone's emotional needs or social image, they will quietly exile you, even while smiling to your face. This is why true insight feels isolating, because you're not just discovering the world, you're discovering that most people would rather be comforted than awakened. Now enter Nietzsche, who took it further. He said, "Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed." In The Genealogy of Morals, he explained how entire systems of values, good, evil, success, failure, are constructed not from truth but from resentment and fear. Society doesn't reward intelligence for its own sake. It rewards conformity disguised as intelligence. That's why the clever manipulator rises while the quiet observer is ignored. That's why the agreeable employee is promoted while the one who questions flawed policies is seen as a threat. Nietzsche would argue, it's not intelligence we honor, it's obedience wrapped in intellectual clothing. Now think of Jean-Paul Sartre. In his world, freedom is terrifying. You're not a fixed identity, you're a constant choice. Every day you define yourself by your actions, and that freedom can paralyze you. Most people, Sartre argued, flee from this responsibility into what he called bad faith, a willful lie they tell themselves to avoid facing their own freedom and fear. But the highly intelligent person doesn't play that game. They can't. They're cursed with self-awareness. They see the falseness in the roles they're supposed to play. They know when they're performing, when others are lying, when a conversation is a charade. And this insight, it makes them unbearable to those who need the performance to survive. The world, you see, runs on silent agreements. We agree not to ask certain questions. We agree not to talk about death, doubt, or the meaninglessness of most routines. We agree that small talk is acceptable, that appearances are truth, that ambition is noble even when it's hollow. The deeply intelligent person breaks these agreements, not out of arrogance, but out of honesty. They ask, what's the point of this? Why do we pretend to care about things that don't matter? Why do we chase things that don't fulfill us? And when they speak that truth, they're met not with curiosity, but with discomfort, because they've violated the unspoken code. Never remind others of what they've chosen to forget. Now layer this with social conditioning. From birth, we're trained to value belonging over truth, fitting in over thinking, safety over honesty. School doesn't reward original thought, it rewards the ability to repeat the correct answer. Jobs don't reward existential depth, they reward compliance, polish, and marketable optimism. So what happens when someone walks into that structure and speaks with radical clarity? They're not seen as enlightened, they're seen as difficult, or worse, dangerous. Because truth, when spoken without apology, exposes the entire charade, and society doesn't want mirrors, it wants makeup. Aldous Huxley warned of this in Brave New World. He didn't predict a world of violent oppression. He predicted a world where people would be drugged by pleasure and distracted by entertainment, a world where the truth isn't silenced by force but drowned in noise. In such a world, the intelligent person isn't just unwelcome, they're irrelevant. Their voice becomes a whisper in a stadium full of cheap applause, and yet they keep whispering, because once you've seen, you can't unsee. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, noticed something terrifying in the camps. The people who survived longest weren't the strongest, but the ones who found meaning. Intelligence, for him, wasn't about abstract ideas. It was about the ability to find purpose in suffering. But purpose requires depth, and depth requires pain, and pain is what most people spend their lives avoiding. So when you walk into a room and carry the weight of your thoughts, your questions, your clarity, people feel it, even if they don't understand it, even if they never say it. They feel that you're not playing by the same rules, and that makes you unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing the social mind cannot tolerate. Here's the core of the hidden problem. Society doesn't fear intelligence that fits in. It fears intelligence that questions why it should. It fears intelligence that remembers its own freedom. It fears intelligence that makes others feel seen too seen. Because once someone sees you, not the mask, not the act, but you, there's nowhere left to hide. And most people deep down would rather stay hidden than be exposed. But this fear comes at a cost. A silent cost. One that ripples through culture, relationships, identity. And unless we understand the consequences of exiling our most aware minds, we risk creating a world that looks alive on the surface, but is slowly dying underneath. You've probably felt it before, but couldn't quite name it. That strange emptiness in conversations. That numbness after a night out with people who smiled a lot but said nothing real. That quiet frustration you carry, like an itch beneath the skin, knowing you're not supposed to say what you really think. Not here, not now, not with them. You start to wonder, is something wrong with me? Am I too much, too intense, too critical? But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is what happens to a society that punishes depth? When society suppresses its thinkers, it doesn't just exile a few individuals. It creates a culture of collective denial. And denial, when left unchecked, doesn't just distort conversations, it rewires reality. Let's talk about the cognitive toll. Our brains are built to seek coherence. When your inner world doesn't match the outer one, your mind burns extra fuel to keep up the illusion. This is called cognitive load. And when you're intelligent, deeply, painfully intelligent, you carry that weight every time you have to filter your thoughts, dumb down your insights, or pretend to be interested in things you know are hollow. You smile at the superficial joke. You nod at the small talk, but inside you're starving, because there's no nourishment in pretending. Over time, this gap between what you see and what you're allowed to say creates what psychologists call emotional dissonance. It's the act of feeling one thing and displaying another, day after day. And it's not harmless. It corrodes your authenticity. It distorts your sense of self. Eventually, you stop trusting your own instincts. You think, maybe I should just stay quiet. Maybe no one wants the truth. Maybe I really am the problem. This is how society slowly breaks its most perceptive members, not by force but by isolation. And that isolation doesn't stay personal. It metastasizes. When intelligent people feel unseen, unheard, and unwelcome, they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and have nowhere to put that care. They stop engaging. They stop contributing. And with each retreat, society loses something vital. It loses its clarity, its conscience, its chance at growth, because insight without a voice becomes silence, and silence in a room full of lies is lethal. Now think bigger, think cultural. When depth is mocked, when nuance is replaced by slogans, when truth is softened into platitudes, what kind of people rise to the top? Not the wise, not the visionary, but the agreeable, the performative, the loudest echo in the chamber. And what do we get in return? Leaders who entertain rather than enlighten. Influencers who sell aesthetics instead of meaning. A population more interested in being liked than in being honest. This isn't an accident. This is what happens when intelligence becomes a threat instead of a treasure. The sociologist Neil Postman warned of a future not of Orwellian oppression but of voluntary amusement, a world where people are too distracted to notice their own decline, where the intelligent are drowned out by noise, not censored by force. He called it a technopoly, a society that surrenders culture to technology, depth to efficiency, truth to trend. We're living in it now, and the irony, many of the people who could have warned us stopped speaking, because every time they tried, they were told, "You're overthinking it. Don't be so negative. Why can't you just be happy?" As if happiness were the point, as if truth were a mood. as if comfort were worth the cost of silence. Let's go deeper. When insight is rejected, mediocrity becomes the standard. And mediocrity, by its nature, resents excellence. It cannot coexist with it, so it does what all fragile systems do. It mocks what it doesn't understand. This is how intelligence becomes pathologized. You're not thoughtful, you're too serious. You're not emotionally intelligent, you're too sensitive. You're not aware, you're paranoid. You're not honest, you're negative. You're not insightful, you're crazy. And over time, society builds systems to manage intelligence rather than harness it. We call it professionalism when we mean suppression. We call it social skills when we mean performance. We call it positivity when we mean denial. And in doing so, we flatten complexity into simplicity, curiosity into compliance, intellect into obedience. The cost? A generation that scrolls instead of thinks, a culture that reacts instead of reflects, a society that treats wisdom like a disease and comfort like a cure. We create citizens who can operate machines but not question systems. We raise children to follow rules but not challenge assumptions. We build structures so polished, so efficient, so automated that we forget to ask whether any of it makes us whole. But here's the part no one talks about. When intelligence is exiled from society, it doesn't vanish. It mutates. Some turn their minds inward and spiral into existential despair. Some numb themselves with distractions, unable to bear the weight of their awareness. And some, those who refuse to break, become cold, detached, strategic, not because they want to be, but because it's the only way to survive in a world that doesn't want their fire unless it's dimmed. This is how the philosopher becomes a recluse. The artist becomes an outcast. The genius becomes a ghost, not because they failed society, but because society failed them. And yet, there is still a flicker, a hunger, a question that won't die. What if we stopped silencing the minds that scare us? What if the discomfort they bring is exactly what we need? What if intelligence isn't a threat but a mirror, not one that flatters, one that reflects, brutally, honestly, redemptively? Because only when we face what we've ignored can we begin to change. But change starts with rebellion, not loud, not violent, internal. It begins the moment you stop apologizing for seeing too much, the moment you choose truth over belonging, the moment you stop dimming your light to fit into rooms built for shadows. Are you ready? Because the next part is where we fight back. You don't need to storm buildings or shout slogans to start a revolution. The most dangerous kind of rebellion doesn't come from crowds. It comes from the individual, quiet, sharp, inward. It begins when you stop asking for permission to be awake. Imagine this. You walk into the same room, the same conversations, the same empty noise, but something's different. Not them, you. This time, you're not performing. You're not bending. You're not apologizing for the depth of your thoughts or the intensity of your silence. You just stand there, fully present, seeing through it all and choosing not to hide. You don't speak to be liked. You speak when there's something worth saying, and if there isn't, you don't pretend there is. That's where rebellion begins. But to get there, you have to commit to something brutal and sacred. You must stop betraying your own mind, because that's what intelligent people do when they try to fit in. They twist themselves into knots. They water down what they know. They betray what they see, just to be palatable. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to see. This is where Schopenhauer's shadow looms large. He didn't sugarcoat human nature. He called it selfish, blind, and driven by desire. But he also understood something powerful. Freedom doesn't come from changing the world. It comes from detaching from its madness, not escapism, clarity. To break free, you don't need to fix society. You need to stop needing its approval. You must become dangerously independent, not in body, in thought. Let's talk about what that really means. First, stop asking shallow people for deep validation. If someone values comfort over truth, they will never understand you, and that's not your fault. Stop begging to be seen by those who only see reflections of themselves. Stop translating your complexity into bite-sized pieces for minds that have no intention of chewing. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. You don't need many. You just need one or two people who get it, who don't flinch when you ask hard questions, who don't shut down when you say what no one else will. Find people who would rather sit in silence with honesty than talk for hours in denial. This is rare, which is why it's sacred. Third, turn your mind into your sanctuary, not your prison. When intelligence is rejected, the mind becomes a battlefield. You second-guess everything. You start to wonder if you're broken or just too much for this world. You're not too much. You're just living in a world that rewards shallowness and punishes depth. Rebel by making peace with your mind. Read what resonates with your soul. Write what scares you. Think without censoring. Feel without apologizing. Because once your inner world becomes safe, the outer one can no longer control you. Fourth, reframe loneliness. You're not isolated because you're unworthy. You're isolated because you refuse to settle. This is the price of freedom. You must walk through the desert before you find the oasis. But understand this. Loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of truthful connection. And when you stop faking it, you make space for the real thing. Fifth, use your intelligence as a weapon for the soul, not against it. There's a trap here. When you've been rejected long enough, your mind can turn bitter. You begin to use your intelligence to isolate, mock, detach. That's not freedom. That's a cage made of your own brilliance. Real rebellion isn't about proving others wrong. It's about becoming so whole that their opinions no longer define you. Don't use your insight to dominate. Use it to liberate. First yourself, then whoever's willing to listen. History is full of these quiet rebels. Socrates didn't start a school. He asked questions so dangerous the state killed him for it. Nietzsche didn't write to be agreed with. He wrote to ignite. Emily Dickinson lived in isolation, writing poetry that no one understood until after she died. Baldwin didn't wait for permission to speak truth to white America. He carved space with words no one could ignore. These weren't protesters with megaphones. They were minds so unshakably honest, the world had no choice but to reckon with them. And they all paid a price, not with fame, with solitude. But they never backed down. And neither should you. Because here's the paradox. Once you stop trying to be accepted, you become magnetic. Not to everyone, but to those who matter. Once you stop pretending, you start to attract people who are real, who see you, who don't need you to shrink. And that's when something shifts. You realize you were never the problem. You were the signal in a world full of noise. And the more you live from that signal, the more others hear it. This is the rebellion. You stop editing your truth. You stop disguising your depth. You stop apologizing for the clarity that burns inside you. And instead, you let it shine. Not as a spotlight, as a fire. Because the world doesn't need more influencers. It needs torchbearers. People who walk into darkness with eyes wide open and say, I see what this is. And I will not go blind just to make you comfortable. You don't need to fix everything. You just need to stop hiding. Because your silence protects no one. And your truth, however unsettling, is a gift. So take off the mask. Let them call you intense. Let them call you crazy. Let them call you dangerous. Because the moment they do, you know you're doing something right. You've walked through the silence. You've felt the weight of being too awake in a world half asleep. You've seen how intelligence, when deep, honest, and unfiltered, doesn't bring applause. It brings exile. And yet you're still here, still thinking, still seeing, still refusing to lie to yourself just to be loved. Why? Because part of you already knows the final truth. You've felt it in moments of stillness, in late-night thoughts, in the ache that never fully leaves. So let's say it plainly. Let's put words to what most never dare speak. And that whisper ruins illusions. Illusions people have spent their entire lives building. We don't exile intelligence because it's wrong. We exile it because it reveals. Think about it. To be truly intelligent is not to memorize facts or recite theories. It is to perceive, to feel the hidden structure of things. To look at a smiling person and sense their grief. To hear a conversation and detect the lies between the lines. To sit in a crowded room and feel the collective emptiness that no one speaks of. That's not intellect. That's insight. And insight is dangerous because it undoes the world. It unmasks love that's really control, success that's really compensation, tradition that's really fear in costume. And most people aren't ready to be undone. So they mock you, ignore you, call you cold, intense, depressive, paranoid, because it's easier to label you than to face what you make them feel, exposed, unsettled, uncomfortable. But that discomfort is the beginning of truth, and truth is the beginning of freedom. Here's what no one tells you. The world you see through this illusion of polite conversations, career ladders, romantic rituals, social media performances, it's not built to nourish the soul. It's built to maintain order. And order is threatened by those who ask, why are we doing this at all? You're not crazy for feeling out of place. You're just sane in a world that has normalized spiritual amnesia. And the moment you understand that fully, viscerally, without apology, you are no longer at war with yourself. You realize your loneliness was never a curse. It was a signal, a sign that your mind refused to fall asleep with the rest of the world. The ultimate truth? You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to remember what most have forgotten, that silence can be sacred, that love doesn't require performance, that meaning isn't found in metrics, likes, or promotions, but in stillness, presence, and inner alignment. You were meant to see. And seeing is painful, because it reveals how much is fake. But it is also liberating, because it reveals how much more there could be. This doesn't mean you're above others. It means you're beneath the surface. You've chosen depth over comfort, truth over popularity, clarity over applause. That's not arrogance. That's integrity. And integrity in a world built on pretending will always feel like rebellion. So what now? You don't need to change the world. You need to stop letting it change you. Stop shrinking. Stop translating your soul into digestible sound bites. Stop letting your inner fire be extinguished by people afraid of its heat. Instead, build a life that doesn't betray your clarity. Create, write, teach, mentor, speak when it matters. Not to change others, but to stay loyal to yourself. Because every time you choose honesty over approval, you reclaim a piece of your soul. And slowly, quietly, you become the kind of person others didn't know they were starving for. You become a lighthouse, not because you shout, but because you exist. You exist as proof that sanity is still possible, that depth is not a disease, that there is life beyond performance. And when others meet you, truly meet you, they remember something long buried inside themselves, something ancient, something silent, something true. So no, you're not broken. You're just one of the few who stayed awake. You're not intense. You're just honest in a world that has forgotten how to be. You're not dangerous. You're just unshakable in a world built on illusion. And the more you live from that truth, not angrily, not bitterly, but fully, the more you become exactly what this world secretly aches for, someone real.
Let them talk. Let them misunderstand you. Let them stare with confusion, discomfort, even fear. You don't need to be understood. You need to be whole. Because in the end, the intelligent don't destroy society. They redeem it. Not with rage, but with presence. Not with force, but with light. Not by fitting in, but by standing alone, so others might remember they can too. Because the world told you it was too much? Good. Now let it speak. The rebellion has already begun, and it started the moment you chose to be fully, radically, unapologetically awake.